I am big. I am so 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 big.
This is Kiba Snowpaw, and I want to talk about Crysis Warhead, or as I keep calling it in my head, Crysis 1.5. Not Crysis 2, not a true sequel, not the next big step forward. Crysis Warhead is a side story, a parallel story, a what was the other guy doing while the main hero was busy kind of game. It follows Sergeant Michael Psycho Sykes instead of Nomad, and it takes place during the same island disaster as the first Crysis. And that idea is not bad. In fact, that idea can work really well. Other games have done it too. Halo would later do something like this with Halo 3 ODST and Halo Reach, where you are not just following Master Chief directly, but seeing another part of the war from another angle. But to be fair to the timeline, Crysis Warhead came out in 2008, before Halo 3 ODST in 2009 and Halo Reach in 2010, so it is not really Crysis copying Halo Reach. If anything, Warhead was already doing that kind of side story idea before Reach came out, and on paper that should have been exciting. The first Crysis had this massive island, this alien threat, this military operation gone wrong, and a whole team of nanosuit soldiers where you only really followed one man. So Warhead had a chance to show us the missing nightmare. It had a chance to say, you saw Nomad's story, but while he was crawling through the jungle, Psycho was living through his own hell on the other side of the island. That could have been great. That could have made the world feel bigger. That could have made the first Crysis feel deeper. But for me, it did not. For me, Crysis Warhead took away too much of what made the first Crysis interesting and replaced it with more noise. More shooting, more rushing, more explosions, more go here, now go there, now survive this set piece. And that is where it starts to feel wrong. The first Crysis was already not perfect. I said that before. I respect Crysis more than I love it. It was a beautiful monster, a haunted technical showcase, a game that became bigger than itself because of the famous question, can it run Crysis? But the first Crysis did have something Warhead does not fully capture. Space, breathing room, that feeling of being dropped into a jungle and being told, figure it out. You could scout, you could sneak, you could swim around, you could steal a vehicle, you could use cloak, strength, speed, armor, or just brute force. You could make mistakes and still feel like you were inside a living sandbox. When the first Crysis worked, it gave you that predator feeling. You were not just walking through corridors, you were hunting inside a machine that barely held together. Warhead feels different. Warhead feels tighter, louder, and more directed. Many people liked that. Critics praised it for being more action-packed, more focused, and more polished. I understand why. Not everyone wants to wander around a jungle, hiding in bushes, waiting for suit energy to recharge. Some players wanted Crysis to stop pretending to be a tactical sandbox and just become a fast, explosive shooter. But that is exactly my problem. Warhead moves closer to that Call of Duty or Battlefield feeling. Not completely, because it still has the nanosuit, open combat spaces, vehicles, and CryEngine physics. But it feels more like the game is pushing me through action beats. More like the game is saying, here is the next firefight, here is the next chase, here is the next explosion, here is the next frozen battlefield. Keep moving. And I do not think that made it better. I think it made it smaller. Not smaller in graphics, not smaller in explosions, smaller in feeling. The first Crysis felt like a dangerous island. Warhead often feels like a ride built through the leftovers of that island. That is the horror of Crysis Warhead for me. It looks like the same jungle. It wears the same nanosuit. It speaks the same language. But something is missing behind the eyes. The game follows Psycho, and I do not hate Psycho. He has more personality than Nomad in some ways. He is louder, rougher, more emotional, more angry, and more human. Nomad sometimes felt like a camera with a gun. Psycho at least feels like a soldier with a temper. But that also changes the tone. Crysis 1 had mystery. It had that slow feeling of the island becoming wrong. Soldiers first, then strange signals, then dead bodies, then alien signs, then the mountain, then the frozen world. It was not subtle, but it had a buildup. Warhead has less patience. It wants to throw you into chaos faster. It wants to be the wild side of Crysis, the angry side, the side with more fire, more shouting, more weapons, more chasing, and more cinematic pressure. Some people call that an improvement. I call it the game losing part of its soul. And then there is the section with the broken nanosuit and the cold. You are forced to move from fire to fire because Psycho's nanosuit is damaged and the environment is freezing. I understand the idea. On paper, that sounds tense. You are in a frozen hell, your suit is not protecting you properly, and survival becomes about heat. That could have been horror. That could have been mental. That could have made the player feel weak in a game built around power. But I did not like it. To me, it felt like the game was stripping away what made Crysis fun and replacing it with a forced gimmick. Go to the next fire, then the next fire, then the next fire. It felt less like survival and more like the game dragging me by the collar. Instead of letting me be clever, it told me exactly what kind of panic it wanted me to feel. That is not the same as freedom. That is not the same as tension. That is a leash. And in a Crysis game, a leash feels wrong. The nanosuit is supposed to be the fantasy. It is supposed to make you feel like a super soldier, even if the energy system limits you. Armor, strength, speed, cloak. That is the identity. That is the thing that separates Crysis from a normal military shooter. So when Warhead starts turning the suit into a broken survival meter, I understand the story reason, but I do not enjoy the gameplay feeling. It becomes another example of the game's selling power and then taking it away. That was already one of my problems with the first Crysis. The suit energy drains fast. Cloak can feel useless if you want to move more than a short distance. The enemies can notice you too easily if you get too close. The suppressor can make your weapon feel like a toy. The game gives you powers, but then keeps tapping you on the shoulder, saying, not too much, not too long, not too free. Warhead does not fix that feeling for me. In some ways, it makes it worse, because the pacing gives you less room to play around with the systems. When the game is always moving, always pushing, always shouting, the nanosuit becomes less like a toolbox and more like a button you press when the script allows it. And of course, Warhead still carries the same Crysis curse, the technical curse. Crysis Warhead was advertised as more optimized than the first game. Crytek said it was designed to run better, even on more modest PCs. That mattered because the first Crysis had become infamous for crushing computers. Can it run Crysis was already becoming a meme, and Warhead was partly sold as the version that would still look amazing without forcing every player to sell a kidney for a graphics card. And yes, Warhead did run better for some people. But let us not pretend the ghost was gone. It was still CryEngine 2. It was still dense jungle. It was still physics, destructible objects, particle effects, high-detail textures, post-processing, shadows, vegetation, explosions, vehicles, and AI all fighting for the same hardware. It was still Crysis. The monster had been trimmed, maybe trained a little, maybe given a better cage, but it was still a monster. That means many of the old problems were still there. Performance could still be heavy. Frame rates could still drop. Settings still mattered a lot. The difference between playing it as a beautiful PC showcase and playing it as a stuttering mess could still be huge. And when a Crysis game drops performance, it hurts more than in many other games because the whole point is the feeling of visual power. Crysis sells you the dream of a living battlefield. The moment the frame rate starts choking, the dream starts turning blue in the face. The physics could still go strange too. The first Crysis had this amazing but unstable physical world. Trees could break, objects could fly, bodies could ragdoll. Animals and debris could move in ways that made you laugh, then made you question reality. Warhead still has that same DNA. When the physics work, they make the world feel alive. When they break, the game becomes a haunted puppet show. Bodies can twitch. Objects can launch strangely. Vehicles can behave like they are lighter than they should be. Debris can scatter like the world is angry. Sometimes it is funny. Sometimes it destroys the mood. That is the problem with a game that wants to be immersive and chaotic at the same time. The chaos gives life, but it also opens the door for the demons. And then the AI. Again, this is Crysis. The AI can look impressive one moment and brain dead the next. Enemies can flank, shout, search, throw grenades, and make firefights feel alive. Then, moments later, they can run around confused, fail to understand where shots are coming from, expose themselves like fools, or behave like the jungle itself has eaten their brains. Warhead's faster action pacing can hide some of that because there is always noise. When everything is exploding, it is easier not to notice that an enemy just made a stupid decision. But the stupidity is still there. It is just covered in smoke. And the weapon feel still has some of the same problems. The suppressor still does not feel satisfying to me. I know why it lowers damage. I understand the balance idea. If silenced weapons were just as strong, stealth would be too easy. But the result is still this weird feeling where quiet shooting becomes weak shooting. At a distance, enemies can feel too spongy. It makes stealth less like being a skilled hunter and more like annoying someone to death. The pacing is also part of the problem. Warhead is shorter than the first Crysis, and that is not automatically bad. A shorter game can be better if it is tight and focused. But for me, Warhead's shorter length makes it feel less like an expansion of the world and more like a compressed action remix. It is Crysis with less patience. It is Crysis with less silence. It is Crysis with less of the slow dread that made the island feel cursed. That is why I do not like Warhead at all compared to the first game. Even though I had problems with Crysis 1, I can still look at it and say, this game mattered. It had ambition. It had a strange, broken, beautiful identity. It was a game that tried to be too big and almost tore itself apart doing it. Warhead feels like it looked at that identity and said, what if we made it louder? But louder is not deeper. More action is not more freedom. More explosions are not more atmosphere. More speed is not more meaning. For me, Warhead feels like the side story that misunderstood what I wanted from the main game. And I know many people disagree. Many players actually prefer Warhead. They say it is better paced. They say Psycho is a better protagonist. They say the action is stronger. They say the performance is better. They say it cuts out some of the slow parts of the first Crysis and gives you the good stuff faster. I understand that opinion. I just do not share it. Because the slow parts were part of what gave Crysis its identity. The quiet jungle, the scouting, the feeling of choosing your own attack, the space between fights, the strange calm before the island turned into a frozen alien wound. That was the part that made Crysis feel like Crysis. Warhead removes too much of that and leaves me with something that feels more normal. Still impressive, still beautiful, still technically important, but more normal. And that is a strange thing to say about a game with nanosuits, alien machines, frozen jungles, and CryEngine destruction, but that is how it feels. It feels like a more normal shooter wearing Crysis skin. The horror story of Warhead is not that it is broken beyond play. It is not. The game works. It has good action. It has strong visuals. It has moments where the battlefield lights up and you remember why CryEngine was feared. It is not garbage. It is not some lazy cash grab with nothing inside. The horror is that it takes something wild and makes it feel safer. It takes the first Crysis, with all its ugly ambition, and turns it into something easier to digest. It feels like someone took the haunted jungle mansion and turned it into a theme park ride. The walls still have blood on them. The lights still flicker. The monster is still in the basement. But now there are rails under your feet. That is what I do not like. I do not want Crysis on rails. I do not want Crysis to feel like it is trying to become Call of Duty. I do not want a nanosuit game where the most memorable thing is being pushed from fire to fire because the suit is broken. I want the island. I want the hunt. I want the broken freedom. I want the dangerous sandbox, even if it is messy, even if the AI is stupid sometimes, even if the physics throw a chicken into the sky like the world has lost gravity. Crysis 1 was flawed, but it had that. Warhead has pieces of it, but not enough for me. And that is why Crysis Warhead is a hard review. Because factually, I can say it is a competent game. I can say it was received well. I can say it was praised. I can say it was a standalone expansion, not a full sequel, and it gave players another view of the same conflict. I can say it included Crysis Wars for multiplayer and that it was part of Crytek trying to respond to the performance complaints around the first game. But personally, I do not like it. I think it took away too much of what was fun about Crysis. I think it leaned too hard into forced action. I think the broken suit cold sections were annoying more than scary. I think the pacing made it feel closer to a normal military shooter. I think it still carried the same performance, AI, physics, and engine problems from the first game. And I think the story, while not terrible, never made me care enough to forgive the parts I disliked. Crysis Warhead is not a disaster. It is worse than that for me. It is a disappointment wearing the face of something I wanted to respect. It stands beside Crysis like a shadow version of the same creature. Same bones, same armor, same engine, same island, same alien nightmare. But
the soul is different. The first Crysis was a beautiful monster that ate my computer. Crysis Warhead is the same monster after someone tried to train it for a faster show. It bites less strangely, it screams louder, it runs in a straighter line, and somehow that makes me like it less. My final verdict is this. Crysis Warhead is worth playing if you want more Crysis, if you like Psycho, if you want a shorter and more action-heavy side story, or if you are interested in the history of CryEngine and PC gaming in the late 2000s. But for me, it is not the better Crysis. It is Crysis 1.5, a side story, a louder remix. A game that many people may enjoy more than the original, but one that left me colder than the frozen island it takes place on. I respect what it is, but I do not like what it chose to become.